legends, a humble village took root on the banks of the River Thames. Little did its inhabitants know they were laying the foundation for a city that would rise to greatness, shaping the destiny of nations and echoing through the corridors of history. In the annals of history, amidst the whispers of time, there is a story about a small village tucked along the banks of a great river. This town, which arose among the mist and murmur of the ancient world, would develop to become one of the most iconic cities in history. Welcome to the narrative of London, which starts with creating a city. Long before the rush and bustle of modern life, before the towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, there was a world unspoiled by human hands. London's foundations were established along the rich banks of the River Thames. The exact beginnings of this ancient hamlet are buried in mystery, lost to history and lore. But one thing is sure, London's story begins with the arrival of the Romans. Londinium, as it later became called, first emerged from the shadows of history during the height of the Roman Empire. In 43 AD, Emperor Claudius's soldiers crossed the Channel and landed on the coasts of Britannia. Among their number was a legion of engineers charged with building a massive bridge across the Thames. This bridge, known as the London Bridge, would usher in a new period of affluence and power. Under Roman dominion, Londinium thrived as a center of commerce and culture. Its streets were thronged with merchants and traders from all over the empire, and its forums were alive with political and philosophical discourse. Despite Roman society's grandeur and wealth, a darker undercurrent existed under the surface. Londinium witnessed history's ebb and flow over the centuries. It endured the storms of invasion and insurrection, demonstrating the endurance of its people. From the fires of Boudicca's insurrection to the crumbling ruins of Roman power, London's spirit stood firm through the ages. So, as we stand on the verge of history, let us travel back in time to a country where echoes of the past still linger in the air. In the heart of London, amidst the shadows of its storied past, lies the key to revealing the secrets of an ancient city. Welcome to the birth of a town. Welcome to the narrative of London. In 43, Emperor Claudius's armies arrived on the coasts of Britain. The Roman army, led by seasoned general Aulus Plautius, marched inland in pursuit of victory and glory. Engineers and architects were among those who had the colossal job of establishing a presence in this distant land. With their disciplined troops and excellent engineering techniques, the Romans were well equipped for the challenges ahead in Britain. They brought military force and a vision of civilization and order which would forever change the island's scenery. Roman forces marched deeper into Britannia and discovered a strategic spot along the River Thames. They elected to create a new settlement tucked between marshland and forest, known as Londinium. Londinium's proximity to the river and natural barriers made it suitable for trading and commercial hub use. The establishment of Londinium signaled the start of a new era for Britannia. Roman engineers began work on a network of roads, fortresses, and public buildings, changing the face of the budding colony. At the center of Londinium was the Forum, a busy marketplace where merchants from all over the empire met to trade products and talk. Londinium grew rapidly after its founding, attracting immigrants and settlers from all across the empire. The city's streets were alive with activity as merchants hawked their wares and artisans worked their trades. Temples and public baths dot the countryside, demonstrating the Romans' fondness for luxury and pleasure. The London Bridge, a masterpiece of architecture that spans the River Thames, was one of Roman London's most prominent structures. Built of stone and timber, the bridge connected the city to the rest of Britannia and beyond. Its building marked Londinium's rise as a central hub of trade and commerce in the Roman world. The city's culture and customs were diverse and dynamic. Soldiers, traders, enslaved people, and artisans came to live in the city from the empire. The pulse of daily life rang through the streets as citizens went about their business, attending to both simple and essential things. For the wealthy elite of Roman London, life was a flurry of parties and politics. Lavish homes studded the countryside, their owners enjoying the comforts that came with their riches and prestige. However, even in the splendor of Roman society, the threat of bloodshed and upheaval loomed large. Despite its wealth, Roman Londinium faced empire issues. Boudicca, ruler of the Iceni tribe, revolted in 60 AD, rocking the city. Boudica, leading a coalition of tribes rebelling against Roman rule, destroyed Londinium, burning it down and murdering its inhabitants. Despite such devastation, Londinium rose from the ashes, its vitality unaffected by the horrors of war. The city rebuilt and renewed itself in the following years, emerging more robust and resilient than ever. The legacy of Roman Londinium remained even after their dominion of Britannia ended. The remains of Roman Londinium still stand as a tribute to its creator's creativity and ambition, and the influence of Roman culture can be observed in everything from architecture to language. As we gaze at the ruins of Roman London, let us recall the vision and determination of the people who constructed this magnificent city. The narrative of Londinium contains echoes of our own challenges and successes, telling us that the past is not as remote as we might believe. Londinium's history is heavily influenced by the renowned general and statesman of ancient Rome, Julius Caesar. Caesar was born into an aristocratic family in 100 BC. He became famous for his military prowess and political intelligence, and eventually became one of the most prominent people in the Roman Republic. Caesar's link to Londinium originates from his military conquests in Gaul, modern-day France, in the middle of the 1st century BC. During these campaigns, Caesar first set his sights on Britannia, seeing it as a prospective conquest that would bring honor to Rome and solidify his conqueror legend. In 55 BC, Caesar led his first expedition to Britannia, crossing the English Channel with a force of Roman infantry and cavalry. Though the campaign was brief and ineffective, it laid the framework for subsequent Roman incursions into the island. Caesar's second trip to Britannia in 54 BC was equally unsuccessful, as logistical problems and intense resistance from native tribes prevented his attempts to establish a foothold on the island. Despite these defeats, Caesar's voyages laid the framework for future Roman conquests in Britannia, including the ultimate establishment of Londinium. While Caesar's direct role in the founding of Londinium was limited, his ambition and vision for Roman expansionism laid the groundwork for the city's eventual growth and prosperity.
London, the capital city of the United Kingdom, is home to approximately 8.9 million people, nearly 40% of whom were born overseas. This makes the modern metropolis one of the most diverse and multicultural cities on the planet. Although you may think this accolade is a recent result of the globally interconnected world we live in today, London has surprisingly been home to a wide array of people from both near and far for the past 2,000 years. From the Romans to the Normans, from the Stuarts to the Victorians, London's unique position throughout history has seen it become the epicenter of empires, political movements, destructive conflicts, and cultural synergies. These have layered themselves upon one another over successive centuries, shaping the modern city we know today. London grew from a small provincial town into one of the largest and most renowned metropolises on the planet. Literally, it had a population of around 10,000 people and was home to a flourishing port, as well as the first iteration of St. Paul's Cathedral, which was founded by the first post-Roman bishop of London, Mellitus, in the year 604. The presence of a Christian place of worship in the city helped promote the conversion of the pagan Anglo-Saxon peoples to Christianity in the decades that followed. However, by the 9th century, the prosperous trading centre and the religious treasures housed in Ludenvik began to attract the attention of other pagan peoples from overseas, who were bent on seizing this wealth for themselves. The Viking Age in Britain began with the well-documented raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793, and shortly afterwards, other treasure-laden centres of worship across the British Isles had fallen victim to their attacks. London was no exception, recording its first Viking raid in the 830s. These raids increased in number and intensity over the following years, until the Vikings switched tactics from raiding to invading. In the year 871, London was occupied by the Great Heathen Army, which purportedly camped within the old Roman walls. By 886, the city had been retaken by English forces under the leadership of Alfred the Great, who ordered that the Saxon settlement of Ludenvik be moved back within the old Roman city walls. The fortifications were subsequently rebuilt, as was the bridge that crossed the River Thames, and the settlement was renamed as Lundenburg. The city's size and commercial wealth meant that it steadily grew in importance over the following centuries, although it faced competition for political prominence from the traditional Anglo-Saxon capital of Winchester. Despite suffering further Viking attacks in the 10th and early 11th centuries, London remained intact. Upon the orders of King Edward the Confessor, it became a new centre for royal power, with the foundation of Westminster Abbey. The church was completed around 1060 and was consecrated shortly before Edward's death in January 1066. Westminster Abbey then became a focal point for royal religious ceremonies in the country, with Edward being the first of 18 monarchs to be buried within the church, and his successor, King Harold Godwinson, becoming the first of 40 kings and queens to be coronated in the same building. The year 1066, however, would mark a pivotal moment in London's history, as well as that of the wider country. The Norman conquest of England was launched by Duke William of Normandy in response to what he perceived as the wrongful succession of King Harold Godwinson to the English throne. Believing himself to be the rightful heir, William invaded England, defeated Harold's Anglo-Saxon army at the Battle of Hastings, and then marched on London to have himself crowned as the new king in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066. Under the new Norman regime, fortresses were built across the country to suppress the native population, and within London itself, several new fortifications were constructed. The most prominent of these was situated at the eastern end of the city, where an initial timber fortification was replaced with the first ever stone castle in England. From that point onwards, the Tower of London, as it became known, would be greatly expanded over the following decades and centuries, serving as a bastion of royal power that was projected across the city and country as a whole. At this point, London was by far the largest and most important city in England, though it was not yet considered to be the nation's capital. Winchester retained this honorary title, as most institutions associated with royal power remained situated there. It was only after a fire destroyed much of Winchester in the 11th century that the royal offices relocated to London. A further strengthening of the city's royal connections occurred in 1097, when King William II began the construction of Westminster Hall, originally intended as a residence for the king, rather than as a meeting place for Parliament. London's development accelerated rapidly during the medieval period, with its population rising from 15,000 in 1100 to well over 80,000 by 1300. Aside from its predominantly native-born population, the city was home to several foreign communities, including French wine traders, Flemish textile merchants, as well as Danish and German seafarers. A sizable Jewish population also resided in the city, having settled there after their entry into the country following the Norman conquest around 1070. Most of London was still confined within the city walls at this time, though the area south of the river, known as Southwark, was also growing in importance. Passage over the river had been made possible by a wooden bridge that existed in various forms for centuries, but in 1176, the timber bridge was replaced with a more permanent stone structure. Upon its completion in 1209, the new London Bridge had a gatehouse at its southern end and was lined with houses on either side, which rose several stories high and protruded over the river. For over 600 years, it remained the only way to cross the River Thames on foot. London's development was not only marked by physical construction, but also by the establishment of its political institutions. The first recorded mayor of the city, Henry Fitzaylwin, took office in 1189, and the city's right to political representation was confirmed in the Magna Carta, signed by King John in 1215. This formally declared London's unique privileges, separating it from the rule of the rest of the country, and ensuring its independent governance by its own citizenry, rather than by royal power. London's fierce protection of its independence was largely motivated by the valuable trade that flowed through its markets. Almost all of England's wealthy merchants lived in London, and they, along with the craftsmen who supported their businesses, organised themselves into guilds. These guilds regulated their respective trades and ensured consistent standards across various professions. The oldest of these, the Weavers' Company, was granted a royal charter in 1155, and over the years many other guilds were incorporated, including the mercers, brewers, goldsmiths, ironmongers, butchers and plumbers, among many others. Despite the prosperity on offer, the tightly packed, winding streets of the city were hotbeds for disease, the most destructive of which struck London in 1348. The Black Death decimated the population, and at its height killed 200 Londoners every day. The city's dense population was also prone to breakdowns in social order. There were countless riots and rebellions during the Middle Ages, but none was more prominent than the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. This saw an army of several thousand country folk march on London to protest against the exorbitant tax rates imposed upon them. The uprising led to the ransacking of the city, during which many opulent buildings were destroyed and government officials killed. Law and order was difficult to establish in medieval London. Although there were several jails in the city for imprisoning those suspected of committing crimes, there was no police force yet established to prevent crime in the first place. Instead, a system of deterrence was employed to show criminals what would happen should they be caught. Those convicted of lesser crimes might be placed in the stocks or pillories, but for those convicted of the most serious crimes and sentenced to death, they were taken to one of the city's execution grounds at Tyburn, Smithfield, or Tower Hill, to meet a grisly end in front of a large, jeering crowd. The dawn of the 16th century and the accession of the Tudor dynasty to the English throne marked a significant turning point in London's history, as it became one of the largest and most important cities in the world. Some of the earliest cartographic representations of London emerged during this time, illustrating the growing scale and development of the city. The Flemish artist Anton van den Wingarde produced a panoramic image of London in 1543, showing that the city had begun to expand beyond the confines of its walls, particularly westwards, towards the centre of governmental power in Westminster. The city's population also boomed during this period, quadrupling from 50,000 in 1530 to over 200,000 by 1603. This growth was largely due to London's increasing importance as a centre of commerce, which attracted people from across the country with the allure of higher wages and the potential to make a fortune. London's trading connections similarly expanded beyond its immediate neighbours in Western Europe to further afield, including Russia, America, Africa and India. Many merchants organised themselves into trading companies, such as the Muscovy Company and the East India Company, which accelerated the adoption of capitalism and laid the groundwork for the English and later British Empire, which would spread to every corner of the globe. When Tudor Londoners were not making money, they were busy spending it in the city's numerous entertainment establishments. Inns, taverns and brothels had existed for many centuries already, but the most defining cultural offering to emerge from this period was the theatre. Initially confined to galleried coaching inns and the houses of the upper classes, plays became so popular and successful that dedicated theatres were built. In 1574, the city banned any such establishments within its walls, prompting their construction on the outskirts. The most famous of these was the Globe in Southwark, which hosted many of the era's most influential and famous works produced by William Shakespeare. As the Tudor period gave way to that of the Stuart era, with the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603, London began its transition into becoming a modern city. Though this transformation was only made possible through the occurrence of several severely disruptive political and social events during the 17th century. The first of these came about in 1605, when a group of discontented English Catholics attempted to blow up King James I and his government during the state opening of Parliament on the 5th of November. Although the plot was uncovered, with the discovery of Guy Fawkes surrounded by barrels of gunpowder in the basement of the building, the subsequent trial and execution of the conspirators in Westminster set the tone for the other bloody events that were to follow. When King James I's son, Charles I, inherited the throne in 1625, he quickly alienated many members of Parliament with his increasingly autocratic rule, which eventually boiled over into a bitter civil war, erupting throughout the country in 1642. London's inhabitants quickly declared themselves in favour of the parliamentarian cause, and constructed a ringwork of fortifications around the city to protect it from a royalist attack. Yet within a few years, the tide had turned in Parliament's favour, and King Charles I was captured and tried for treason. On the 30th of January 1649, he was executed outside the banqueting house in London, with his head being removed with one fell swoop of the executioner's axe. In the decade following this, London remained the political centre of the country, although it was now governed as a republic until the monarchy was restored in 1660, with King Charles II being crowned inside Westminster Abbey in the following year. London, nevertheless, remained a dangerous and volatile place, for it was struck by plague in the year 1665, which claimed the lives of a staggering 60,000 people. To make matters worse, in the following year of 1666, a great fire swept through the city and destroyed the greater part of it, confined within the old medieval walls. In the fire, building regulations were introduced, and the city was reconstructed largely in stone and brick.
This mighty tidal river was once the artery of the city, but now all the bridges seem to sew the whole place together, linking the north with the south. Powerful and functional, graceful, sleek and slender, artistic and colourful, we've got innovative and modern bridges beside the grandeur of Gothic design and Victorian ingenuity. And an important part of London's social and economic progress can be measured by its very first bridge, London Bridge, which has existed in 4 very different incarnations that date back to medieval and even Roman times. I've just come down Fish Street Hill, and this is Lower Thames Street. And underneath my feet are the remains of the Roman bridge, the very end of the Roman bridge on the North Bank. Of course, we're now about 100 metres away from the river, because in those days it was very much wider, with sloping, muddy banks. Ali Taylor from the Thames Explorer Trust helps schoolchildren discover London's history on the banks of the Thames. The Romans built the first London Bridge, yes?
They did.
And it's just downstream here.
Yep.
How did they choose where to build it?
Well, one of the reasons was this was the highest point that the tide reached in those days. And so they got a free lift with the tide up the river.
Right.
Another reason they built it here was because it doesn't look like it now, but this area was full of islands and it was very shallow, and so they could build a bridge across. It was a good bridging point, good fording point.
Is there any evidence of it here on the bank of the river?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, we had a bit of a star find. And these were the children, because the children are wonderful at finding
They've got sharp
things.
eyes, haven't they?
They have indeed. Now, those are Roman floor tiles.
They're amazing that they haven't knocked off in all that time. It's at least 1,500 years old, isn't
Well,
it?
what happens is, you see, they're buried in the mud.
Okay, and then they get protected.
This is a fantastic archaeological site because you've got the tide coming in and out. So twice a day, the River Thames kindly does the excavation work.
Right.
So if we came down here next week, we'd find something totally
else.
different.
Gotcha.
So that's why it's always really exciting to come down here, because you never know what you're going to find.
No one knows quite what happened to the Roman London Bridge. Some historians think it fell into disrepair after the Romans left. Others believe its wooden construction was patched up and used right up until the building of London's very first stone bridge in 1176. This is the church of St Magnus the Martyr, and just through there is what used to be Bridge Street, the approach to the old London Bridge. Come and have a look. These lumps of stone were actually part of the old London Bridge. Bridge Street was here, this was the end of the bridge, and it went straight across the river there. Oh, they seem to have built something in the way. Still, I'm told there's a lovely model of the bridge inside the church. it is. Just look at this. What amazes me is all the buildings on the bridge. There are 3-storey houses, there are shops down below, there's a chapel, the Thomas à Becket Chapel, there's a gatehouse here, there are pigs in the street, and lots of chaps on horses and cows here as well. Here's a bit of naked bridge, but mostly it's covered in buildings. Now, in the old days, before this, they could put a single arch over a stream, but here, this is 276 metres long, and they had to have, look, 19 arches. Absolutely extraordinary. Arch after arch, and they're incredibly narrow too. Just look at this one here. Hello. You can see it'd be quite tough to get a boat through there, it's so narrow. And in fact, if the tide was unfavourable, there could be a 6-foot drop from your side upstream to my side, so that you'd shoot through at tremendous speed. It was called shooting the bridge, and the watermen loved it, but it was dangerous. A lot of them died. And a proverb came which said, the bridge was for wise men to cross over and for fools to go under.
Belching out smoke, carrying gas-lit, open-air carriages.
In 1863, the Metropolitan line opened as the world's first underground railway, with 7 stations connecting Paddington to Farringdon Street. In its first year, it carried 9.5 million passengers, and in its second, a staggering 12 million. But this underground wasn't exactly underground at all.
Stations like this were built using what's called cut and cover construction, which meant that the lines ran just beneath the surface. Effectively, they dig a big trench, lay the track, and then pop a roof back over the top. So we're not deep down here at all. But building these trains in drains was impossible without causing a huge amount of disruption on the streets above.
And that was a problem. What was needed was a way of digging underground tunnels without causing so much damage. The inventive Victorians came up with the answer.
Grab a torch, you can see everything.
Abandoned under Moorgate Station is a revolutionary piece of equipment, and taking me to see it is TfL engineer Omar Mohammed.
This is it.
Yep, great head shield.
When you compare this to kind of modern day tunnel boring machines, the
Absolutely.
technology involved in that, this might look quite simple, but it did the same thing just in Victorian times.
Exactly. It's the same principle used today.
The Great Head Shield was the tunnelling machine pioneered by the Brunel family. Each miner would dig out the earth from their chamber. The shield could then be propelled forward with jacks, and a cast iron lining put in its place to form the tunnel.
And these are the original cast iron
Yes,
lines,
exactly,
aren't they?
yeah.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
This-
100 years old, yeah.
and they're still doing the job today.
Yeah.
The Great Head Shield is responsible for the first section of what we now call the Northern Line, the first proper tube line that was built by boring a tunnel rather than cutting a trench and putting a roof over the top.
Dumping raw human, animal, and industrial waste directly into the River Thames came back to haunt the City of London in the form of the Great Stink. The smell was so bad it could cause vomiting in people miles downwind, but it would also eventually lead directly to the construction of London's first modern sewer system. Today,
This is the River Fleet. It looks like a sewer, smells like a sewer.
That River Fleet was essentially a cesspit carrying disease through London. So it was decided to cover it up, and using 318 million bricks, Victorian engineers turned it into this.